Hi guys, and welcome to another video. So today we're jumping back into Tailscale, and this is the second part of the Tailscale series. Now, in the first part, we explored the basics of Tailscale with its foundation on the open source WireGuard protocol, and how it makes setting up a VPN incredibly straightforward, removing all the normal headaches of complex configurations and things like port forwarding. Well, today we're going to take things a step further. We're going to be dabbling into integrating Tailscale directly into Docker containers running on our Unraid servers. And no, I don't mean just integrating Tailscale to the Unraid server and you can access your Docker containers. No, we're going to be looking at how we can actually integrate Tailscale directly into a container on its own. Now, as you all know, containers are isolated from the host by nature, providing a really secure way to run applications. And by adding Tailscale into a container, we can access this container from anywhere in the world or give access to friends and family. Now, this allows us to grant access only to the isolated container, and we're doing this without exposing it to the internet. So let's take a media server container, such as Jellyfin or Emby. So this setup will give our Emby or Jellyfin container its own private Tailscale IP, allowing us to have a super secure connection to that container. Now, as I mentioned before in the first part, some applications actually require a fully qualified domain name to actually work. For example, Bitwarden. So what we're going to look at as well in this video is how we can tie Tailscale to a reverse proxy. We're going to be using Swag. And so then we can have a fully qualified domain name along with a valid SSL certificate from Let's Encrypt. And that means the Bitwarden service is going to be accessible through a secure domain name, but only to people that we invite to the Tailnet. So it remains completely private, functioning seamlessly, but being invisible to the rest of the world. And obviously we don't just have to do that to Bitwarden. If we wanted to have a domain name for Jellyfin, we could set up Jellyfin in the exact same way. So hopefully by the end of this second part, you're going to have a good understanding of how to connect your containers securely and privately. We'll cover both direct Tailscale integration and also domain-based access, giving us two different ways to choose how we can access our services without ever being exposed to the public internet. Right, so enough talk, let's jump in and get started. And let's start by looking at integrating Tailscale, I think, into the Emby container. Now, it's actually incredibly easy to integrate Tailscale into a Docker container. And we're going to be using the Tailscale Universal Docker mod, which allows us to slipstream Tailscale into any of the Linux server.io containers. So yes, we do have to use a Linux server.io container to be able to use this Docker mod. So let's jump over onto my backup server here, and I'm going to go to the Apps tab, and let's do a search for Emby. Now, as you can see here, there's quite a few different Emby containers. And in fact, a lot of people who are new to Unraid, when they come across two community applications and search for an application, they wonder why there are multiple versions of containers. Well, basically, the application inside the container is exactly the same. The difference is how the person who actually put together and maintains the container, how they actually put together that specific container. And so the Linux server containers all allow us to use the Docker mod that we're going to need. Now, Linux server, they've got a lot of different containers. For example, if we go to repositories here, we can actually search for Linux server, and there we have Linux server's repository here, and they've got a whole bunch of different containers. So it looks like there's 167 pages of Linux server containers. So there's a whole load of things we can use Tailscale with if we want to integrate it directly into a container. Anyway, let's go back and install Emby. So obviously, let's click install on the Linux server version here. And here we're just going to choose the branch, doesn't matter which one it is. I'm going to choose the Emby beta version. And then just as normal, we'd need to fill in this here. Obviously pointing TV shows to where our TV shows are and movies to where our movies are, and removing the things in the container we don't actually need. Now, I'm not really sure why they've got Raspberry Pi variables in an Unraid container, but they have. So anyway, I'm just going to remove these because obviously Unraid doesn't run on a Raspberry Pi, but Docker does, so probably that's why they're there. Right, so I'm going to quickly fill this in. Okay, so I'm going to pull down the container. So obviously now Emby is installed, we can just access it through the web UI. And this, as you can see here, is through its local web UI. Now, just as we did in the last video, we can access any container through the Tailscale IP of the server and the port number of the container. So you might be wondering, well, why do we actually need to put Tailscale inside of the container? Well, obviously, sharing the whole of the server over Tailscale with other people basically gives them access to everything on that server, so that might not be the ideal situation for your needs. So let's go back to the Docker tab here and add Tailscale directly into the container. So we need to go back to the Docker template and we need to add some variables to this template. So I'm going to click here on add another path, port, variable, label or device, and I'm going to add a variable. Now all of these variables are in the description of this video, so you can copy and paste them to make it easier. And also there's a link to the GitHub page for this particular Docker mod. Now, when we add a variable, the important thing is actually the key and the value. But I always like to make the name the same as the key. It's just easy to actually see what's what when we look at the template later. So for the name, all in caps, I'm putting docker_mods, and the same for the key. Now for the value here, we need to paste in this value. And this value is basically telling the container where it can download the Docker mod from. Now you don't need to put it as a default value, but I'm going to put it as the default value underneath as well. Okay, so with that done, I'm going to click add. And now I'm going to click here to add something else. Again, another variable. And here I'm going to paste in Tailscale_state_dir, putting that value for the name and the key. Then for the value, I'm going to paste /var/lib/tailscale. I'm going to put it as the value and the default value. And this is just telling the container the directory where it wants to store the Tailscale's like persistent data, its state data. And in a moment, we're going to actually map this same location onto the Unraid server. But we'll worry about that in a moment. Okay, again, let's click add and let's add the next thing. Now again, this is a variable and I'm going to paste in here into the name and the key, Tailscale_hostname. So the Tailscale hostname is basically the machine name that we'll see inside of Tailscale on the web UI. So I'm going to put mine as Emby-Imperial because it's the Emby container running on my server called Imperial. And I may as well put it in the default value as well. Okay, let's click add. So again, we need to add another variable. So let's click here to do that. Now this time, the variable we're adding is Tailscale_auth key. Now, we need to go and generate a key that will allow this container to be authenticated into our Tailnet. So, we need to log into our Tailscale web UI, and then we want to go to settings here, and then under personal settings, we want to click onto keys. And so here, we can generate some authentication keys. So, I'm going to click here, generate auth key, and the description, I'm going to call it Emby Imperial. Now I could make this reusable, so I can reuse this key to add multiple things. I don't want to do that, so I'm just going to leave it as is, and I'm going to click on to here, generate key. So now this key is only usable once to authenticate this particular container. So I'm going to copy it here onto the clipboard, and now go back to the Docker template, and I'm going to paste in the value here, and also as the default value. Okay, so almost there, just one more thing to add now. So this time we're going to click on add, and this time it's going to be a path. So here, for the container path, I'm going to paste in /var/lib/tailscale, and let's make it the name as well. And so this is where the container is going to store this information for Tailscale inside of the app data. So now under host path, let's click onto it and browse to app data, and then Emby, and at the end here, let's put Tailscale, which will create a new folder inside of the Emby app data called Tailscale. So whatever the container that you're adding Tailscale to, we need a place to put the Tailscale app data basically, and it's always best just to put it in the app data of the container in a folder named Tailscale at the end. Okay, so let's click on to add, and now click on to apply. Okay, so we can see here, it says the command finished successfully. And so here I'm just going to open the logs so we can see what's happening. Okay, so here we can see that it downloaded the Docker mod into the container. And here I'm just going to wait for the logs to finish so I know that everything's ready. And then go back to the Tailscale web UI. And now coming back here onto the machines inside of our Tailnet, we can see here's Emby Imperial, and we can see here that it's connected. So we could share this with friends now, just popping their email addresses in here. And I'm going to copy the IP address here now. And so now I can paste in the IP into a browser along with Emby's port of 8096. And we can see I'm straight into Emby. But basically, because this Tailscale IP is only for Emby, if I just put in the actual IP, well, I can't get to anything else at all. So it's totally secure and private and just limited only to the Docker container that we've installed Tailscale in. Okay, so now let's have a look at actually connecting a reverse proxy to our Tailscale. So I'm going to go back across to Tailscale here, and I'm actually going to totally remove Emby from my Tailnet. And going back to the Emby container, I'm going to remove all the variables that we put in earlier. So now it's just the standard Emby container. So before doing anything, I'm going to go across to settings here, and then to the Docker settings. I'm going to temporarily disable the Docker service. And what I want to do is make sure preserve user-defined networks that this is set to yes. And so with that set to yes, I'm going to re-enable the Docker service and click apply. So what this does is allows me to make my own custom Docker networks, and they'll preserve through reboots. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new Docker network now. And to do that, I just open up a terminal window. Now I'm going to type docker space network space create, and then the name that I want my custom network to be. And I'm going to call it ProxyNet. Okay, so my custom Docker network's now being created, so I can close this window. And now I'm going to go to the apps tab here, and I'm going to do a search for Swag. Now the reason I'm using Swag is because it's by Linux server, so we can install Tailscale into it. So I'm going to click on to install here, and the first thing I'm going to do is just change these port numbers. So I'm just going to put a 1 in front of both. So 1443 and 180. Now here I'm going to put the domain name which I'm going to use with my reverse proxy. So obviously this needs to be a real domain name that we own. And also we need to have its DNS managed by Cloudflare. So if we don't have a domain, we can actually buy one through Cloudflare. And if we already have a domain and it's not registered at Cloudflare, well, we can actually add that domain to Cloudflare and have Cloudflare just manage the DNS. So let's jump onto a browser and do a search for Cloudflare, and then click on to log in. Now, if we don't already have an account, we just need to click on to sign up. And here we'd put in our email address and create a password. Then we'd just verify that we're human and then click to sign up. Now we would also, after doing that, need to verify our email. Now I've already got a Cloudflare account, so I'm going to just log in. Okay, so this brings us to the Cloudflare dashboard here. And we can see here that I don't have any websites added to this Cloudflare account. So there's two ways we can actually add a domain to our account. We can actually register a new domain. So if you don't already have a domain name, then it's super easy, and Cloudflare is very, very cheap to register domains. So we just click here, register domains, then do a search for the domain name we're looking for. So I'm just going to type my Tailscale and click onto search. So there's a whole bunch of ones here. So if I was buying one, I would probably buy this one because it's only $4.94. So we just click purchase, and then here we just need to fill in our details. And then when we've done that, we can choose to pay by either a credit card or by PayPal. Now, obviously I can't continue anymore because I haven't filled any of this out, but this is how you buy the domain. And then after buying it, you would then find the domain in your Cloudflare dashboard. Now, I've already got a domain elsewhere. I registered one a long time ago with GoDaddy. So I'm going to add that domain now to Cloudflare, even though I didn't buy it here. So all I need to do here is click Get Started. And here I'm going to put in my domain name, which is my-domain.uk. So with that done, I just need to click Continue. And here it's going to ask us to pick a plan. Now we need the free one here. There's absolutely no point in buying anything else. So with that done, I'm going to click continue. And now here it's telling us to add the domain to Cloudflare. I need to update the name servers with my registrar, which for me is GoDaddy, and set the name servers to be these two here. Okay, so here I am in my GoDaddy account and I'm logged into the section for my-domain.uk. So all I do is click onto name servers and put the name servers in here. Now you can see I've already done that. So then once you've changed your name servers to match the ones that Cloudflare asked you to, we can just go back to Cloudflare and just scroll down to the bottom of the page, and I can click check name servers now and then continue. At the moment here it says pending name server update. It can take a little while for the name servers to actually go through, but it shouldn't really take longer than 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, so now we can see my domain is added. It's active and it's on the free plan. Okay, that's great. So I've got my domain and it's in Cloudflare. So now let's go back to the Unraid server. And under URL here, we just need to put our domain name. And for me, that's my-domain.uk. So next here under validation, because we're using Cloudflare, we can swap this to DNS. And for subdomains, I'm going to put in wildcard. So this will allow us to create a wildcard SSL certificate for this particular domain. Now the DNS plugin, we need that set to Cloudflare. And for email here, we just need to pop in our email address. And for only subdomains, let's set that to true. Okay, so with that done, I'm going to pull down the container. Okay, so we're not done yet. So let's have a look at the logs of Swag and see where we are at the moment. So we can see here at the bottom, it requested a certificate for my-domain.uk, but it was unable to actually get it. And that's because we need to fill in the Cloudflare INI file. So let's do that now. So we need to go back over to Cloudflare, and in the top right hand corner here, if we click here and go to my profile, then click onto API tokens here, and if we view the global API key and click onto view, this will show us our Cloudflare API key. Now obviously I've blurred mine out here, but all we need to do is click onto copy here, and that will copy it to the clipboard. Now another thing we need to take note of is the email address which is associated with our Cloudflare account. So now with these two things, let's go back to the Unraid server and let's go to shares, then let's browse the app data, go to swag, and now we need to go into this directory here, dnsconf, and we need to edit the cloudflare.ini file. Now using the built-in Unraid file manager, we can't actually edit INI files, but we can do a little workaround. If we just rename it temporarily to .txt, we can now edit this because it's a text file. So the first thing we need to do is to put in our email address that's associated with Cloudflare up here. And then underneath, we need to paste our Cloudflare API key. Now what I'm pasting here is a fake one, and in a moment off camera I'll change it to the correct one. So with that done, we just need to click on to save. Now we need to rename the file back to what it was before. So let's take off the .txt, putting it back as an INI file. Okay, so now let's go to the Docker page and restart Swag. So now let's go to the logs and see if it generates the certificate. Okay, so we can see the certificate's been created correctly. So now we've got a valid wildcard SSL certificate. Okay, so we've got Swag now, so it's creating the SSL certificate. So now what I need to do is, just as we did to Emby previously, I need to add the variables here so we can add the Tailscale Docker mod. Okay, so I've got my variables in here. I'm going to call this Swag Imperial. But as you can see, I haven't yet put the auth key in. So I'm going to go across here, over to Tailscale, Settings, Keys, and I'm going to generate a new key. Okay, so there's the new key. And I'm going to paste it in. So with that done, I'm going to click on to apply, and done. Okay, so let's have a look at the logs again. Okay, so everything's ready. We can ignore this error here. And so now if we go back to Tailscale, we should see Swag here. Okay, so yes, Swag's there and it's connected. Right. So the next thing we need to do now is we need to copy the IP address of Swag. So okay, that's copied to the clipboard. So now we need to go back over to Cloudflare. And once here, we need to click on the name of our domain. And then on the left here, go to DNS. Now what we're going to do is we're going to set up an A record for a subdomain, which is going to point to the Tailscale IP. So here I'm going to click add record, and we want to make sure this isn't proxied. We must turn this off. And the record type is an A record, and I'm going to make Emby and point it to the Tailscale IP of my Swag container. Now of course, this will only work for devices that are connected onto my Tailnet. For anyone else, this IP just won't go anywhere. So I'm going to click on to save, and we can see Cloudflare reports it as a reserved IP, and that's because it isn't publicly accessible. Okay, so let's test this so far. Now at the moment, the PC I'm on, I've disconnected it from my Tailnet. So if I open up a new tab, and I paste in that subdomain we've just created, emby.my-domain.uk, well, it doesn't bring us anywhere. However, if I connect onto my Tailnet and then refresh the page, we can see here now I'm hitting the Swag reverse proxy. Now no, it's not going to Emby yet. That's because we have to funnel the traffic from Swag into Emby. So let's do that now. So let's go back across to the Unraid server, and I'm going to stop Swag. Now if you remember at the very beginning of the video, I made a custom Docker network. So I'm going to edit the Emby container here, and I'm going to scroll down here until I come to network type, and I'm going to pop that onto my custom one I made, the one called ProxyNet. And I'm going to click on to apply. Okay, so Emby started on the network ProxyNet. So now I want Swag to be on that same network. So I'm going to click here and go to edit and put Swag on the same network as that of which I have Emby on. So now you see, if I open a terminal window into Swag, you can see here if I type ping space Emby, it can resolve the other container by its name. Now this is important because it makes setting up Swag much easier. So let's close this window, and I'm going to go to the Shares tab here, and I'm going to go to appdata and browse that. Then let's look in the Swag folder, then Nginx, and then in this folder here, proxyconfs, I'm going to look here for a file called emby subdomain.conf.sample. So all I need to do is rename this, removing off the .sample. So this makes it a proper config file, and when Swag loads, it will load this configuration file, which will point it to Emby. So let's scroll to the top, and in the file type here, I'm just going to type conf, and we can see the config file here. So let's have a look inside it a moment. So this is our proxy configuration file for Emby. Now I'm going to make it a bit bigger here. Now there's a couple of important things to look at in this file. Now this part here, where it says server_name, and this emby.asterisk here, this corresponds to the subdomain that we've set up for Emby. So obviously I just set up emby.my-domain.uk, but if I'd made this say video.my-domain.uk, well then I'd want to change Emby to be video. So this first part here is whatever the subdomain is which you want to actually forward through to the container. Now the other part that's important is the upstream app here. Now we can see here that the set upstream app is set to Emby. Now because Swag is made so it can work by resolving the actual host name of the container rather than having to rely on the IP address. So because my container is called Emby, then obviously the upstream app name has to match. For example, if I go across to my main server here, I've got an Emby container here, but we can see that this one is called Emby Server Beta. Then we'd actually have to change this part here. Now another really important thing here about this upstream app. Now I found that some servers for some reason, even though they can resolve this name when you do a ping, they don't seem to actually work with Swag being able to forward through the traffic properly. And I'll show you, if that's the case for you, how you can fix that in a moment. But for now, I'm going to leave the configuration file as it is, And anytime you make any changes to a configuration file, it's very important that we restart Swag. Okay, so Swag's running now. So let's test it and see if it's working. So I'm going to paste in the actual domain name here. So https emby.my-domain.uk. And we can see here, I'm getting 502 bad gateway. Now this is exactly what I was talking about earlier with some servers not working when we use the actual host name. Now this isn't just when it's with Tailscale. I find this happens all of the time for all of my containers. So all we need to do is make a simple change. So we just need to edit the proxy config file here. And instead of using the actual name of the container, all we need to do is use the IP address of the actual Unraid server. So for me, that's 10.10.20.196. So if I change that and click save, and because we've made a change, we're going to have to restart Swag. And now if we go back to this page here and we refresh this page, now we're straight into Emby using a fully qualified domain name. But at the moment, this is only accessible to me and people who I've invited onto my Tailnet. So as we saw in the previous video, it's really easy to actually share a device on your Tailnet. So if I wanted to just share the reverse proxy, because I didn't want anyone to be able to actually get to my actual main server, then I'll just share here just my Swag Imperial container, and I put in the email addresses for those people who I'd want to share access to my Swag container, and as such, any subdomain that Swag actually routes through. Okay, so that's setting up Emby through the reverse proxy using Tailscale. Now that's quite a simple one to actually set up. But how about Vaultwarden or Bitwarden here? Now the thing to look at with Bitwarden here is because we're going to be using the IP address of the server 10.10.20.196, we're also going to have to use port 4743 because it's port 80 in this container that's mapped to 4743. So now let's go and have a look at the configuration file in Swag, which we can see here. So the first thing here, the server name. Now I've actually set up a subdomain not called Vaultwarden but Bitwarden. So that's the first thing that I'm going to change. So the next thing I need to change is the upstream app value here. But also we'll notice that the port is set to 80. So I need to change both of these values. So first let's change Vaultwarden to 10.10.20.196. And I'm going to put that on the clipboard to make it easier. And let's change the port number here to 4743. Now some containers will have this in multiple places. So if I scroll down here, we can see here's another place that I need to change it. This is the second reference to upstream app. So let's pop the IP address in here and the port here. And another one. And finally the last one here. Okay, so that's everything set correctly. So let's save this file. And as always, when there's been a change, we need to restart Swag. And now when I'm connected to my Tailnet, I can get straight to the Bitwarden web UI. And the domain here, bitwarden.my-domain.uk. Now normally with Bitwarden, we use a browser plugin, and I'm going to add this to my Chrome. Okay, so now in the plugin needs to be able to access the domain. So I'd select self-hosted, and at the top here, put in my domain. Then next, obviously, we need to log in with our email address and then put in our unlock key. And so now the Tailscale browser app is working absolutely perfectly through a fully qualified domain name, but through our Tailscale. But going over to another PC, which is not a part of the Tailnet, if I try and go to the web UI of Bitwarden, well, it's just not going to happen. It's impossible to connect to this domain unless the device connecting is connected also to my Tailnet. So that means no one can actually try and brute force and guess the password, get into my Bitwarden and be able to access all of the passwords. So in my opinion, it's a super secure way to use Bitwarden, making it totally private. Okay guys, so that brings us to the end of the second part of the Tailscale series. Now in the third part, we're going to be looking at how we can use Tailscale to fully get around the limitations of carrier grade NAT, Now, we did see in this video how we can actually get around carrier grade NAT, but only to specific people we give access to our Tailnet to. But we can fully get around everything into do a carrier grade NAT and have public URLs that people can connect to by using Tailscale along with a cheap VPS. And that's what we're going to be looking at in part 3. But anyway, guys, that wraps it up for today. Now, I really hope that you found the video useful. If you did, then please give it a thumbs up and share this video with anyone else who you think might find it useful. Now, if you're not already a subscriber, then please subscribe to the channel for more videos like these. And as always, I want to give a really big thank you to all of my patrons and supporters out there. Thank you so much, guys, for all of your support. And if any of you out there want to join these great bunch of people, then please see the links in the description below. Anyway, guys, it's getting late here and it's time for me to go. But whatever you're up to for the rest of the day, I hope it's good, and I'll catch you in the next video.